I want to talk about the civilized, the uncivilized, who civilized who, and who the savages really are, what a savage really is. I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to keep this brief because I know your time is valued, it's precious to you. So with that being said, I'm just going to go right in. Now, you have certain groups of people that claim to be civilized, and they claim that they brought civilization to the world. They claim that certain other groups of people are uncivilized and that they needed to be civilized because they were savages. These will be the people that you see living natural ways of life. Those who live in the jungle, those who live out in the country, those who live outside of cities, who live in what they call tribal societies or modern day tribal societies, where they live away from the cities and all of the modern so-called advancements, and they stay secluded. They stay in their area. They haven't really been exposed much to outside influence. They still live a natural way of life, and they preserve their culture regardless of what's transpired over the past centuries. If you ever notice, somehow the European has tricked everyone into thinking that they've civilized the planet, when in actuality these same people that they call savages, are the ones that actually civilized them, that taught them how to bathe, that taught them how to read, to write, that taught them how to be human, that taught them how to be man, that taught them how to be kind of like man or kind of like human, mankind, humankind. They gave them a blueprint, an outline on what it was to be upright, what it was to be man and not animal. And when I say animal, I mean savage animal. Animal without any order. I don't want to say a primitive animal, but an animal that functions from a reptilian or parasitic state of mind, that thinks only about its survival and that's willing to kill anything in order for it to survive or to live beyond its means of survival. Now, if you ever notice when you watch the Discovery Channel, the Learning Channel, National Geographic, and they show these tribes or these tribal people, these people still live in so-called tribal ways of life, and they're living off in the jungle or in the forest, and they have their houses built up out of trees and leaves, and they barely walk around with any clothes on. The women are practically naked, if not entirely naked. The men are practically naked, if not entirely naked, which the body is being radiated by the sun. They comprehend that wearing clothes limits their exposure to sunlight, and they know that they get their vitamins and their nutrients from the sun, same as plants do, same as the earth does. So they limit their clothing because they want to absorb all of the radiance from the sun, all of the nutrition that the sun has to offer without blockage. They already have trees and things like that that are blocking the sun, so clothes to them is unnecessary. They want to absorb all of the sun's rays. There's nothing wrong with that. It's feeding their melanin. You'll also notice that their children, they don't wear diapers. They don't have baby bottles. They don't have rattles. They don't have pacifiers or teething rings. They don't have baby bouncers or baby walkers. They're not laying down in playpens with a little chime swinging over their head that plays music. They don't have musical swings in order to rock them to sleep. They're not crying. They're not whining. They're not crying for a bottle all the time. They're not obese. They're not overweight. They don't lack energy. They actually develop faster they mature faster, and they're capable of performing the tasks of adults or young adults at a faster age, which is a good thing. See, because they don't have all of these distractions. They don't need pacifiers or teething rings or toys to keep their minds occupied, because they're not being deprived of the proper nurturing from their parents. They're not being born emotionally disturbed. They're not being fed synthetic processed substances called food or disguised as food. They're actually eating live food, which food is anything that nourishes and energizes and fuels the body. So in their natural environment, they're feeding upon natural things, vegetation, things that grow from the earth to properly fuel and nourish their body. They're breastfeeding their children, which the breastfeeding is excellent for the brain and for intelligence, so their children are being born smarter. The women are connected to their children more closely. They carry their children with them most times in indigenous cultures or in natural cultures. They keep their babies on their fronts or on their backs, so the baby can constantly feel their heartbeat, smell them. The baby's constantly close to them, is connected to that parent, whether it's the mother or the father. The babies are bonding properly. They don't have bondage issues, so they're not running around whining and crying all the time because they're not being ignored. The parents are able to give them the proper attention. When the women go out and do women things, the female children go with the women and they learn to do female things. When the men go out and do men things, the men children and the male children, they go out and they learn to do male or men things. So when you hear certain phrases like let a kid be a kid or let a child be a child, what does that mean exactly? See, because when you're dealing with a European and a European way of thinking, the European will convince you that their way is the only way, that any other way is savage or primitive or uncivilized, that you have to do things according to them. But if you look at their offspring and the way their offspring are turning out, do you really want to follow their methods and their philosophies of parenting? Mind you, if you go back 50, 60 years, who was the help? Who were the wet nurses? Who were nurturing and raising their children? Who were teaching and educating their children? Who was providing their children with the proper nourishment and nurturing that a parent should be providing? It wasn't the parents, it was the so-called help or the so-called slaves that done these things or did these things, not the so-called masters or enslavers. So when you're dealing with European logic, you're dealing with a lazy logic, a logic of laziness that wants everyone else to be active, that wants everyone else to be motivated, while they sit back and watch you work. They like to relax as you work. Nag and nitpick and tell you that you're not working correctly or you're not working fast enough for them. Well, you know there's a saying, if you want something done right, you should do it yourself. Why don't they follow that? Why didn't they follow that example and do things themselves, since they knew how to do things so much better than everyone else? Why did you run around oppressing everyone, trying to force them to do your bidding if you're so superior and you can do everything better? Why didn't you do it yourself to get those desired results or those better results, since we feel that the European way is the best way? Now mind you, if you look at European society, the depression, the mental illness, the physical disorders and ailments, people losing their minds, people's bodies are distorted out of proportion, people are functioning dysfunctional. The functioning dysfunctional. This is the society. This is the lifestyle or the death style that European culture is providing. It's a dead culture, a death culture. That's why everything is dead in this culture. They eat dead things. They worship dead things. Everything of substance or value to them is something that's dead, something that's non-living, something that's synthetic, whether it's their synthetic technology, synthetic devices, or any other synthetic equipment or pacifiers or things of interest. It's all synthetic though. None of it is actual. None of it is actually organic or natural. But what do you expect from synthetic or grafted or unnatural beings? Of course they're going to be entertained by the unnatural. Of course they're going to want to be consumed or want to consume the unnatural. They're being consumed by what they are, synthetics and unnaturals. Because if that is your essence, then of course that is your comfort zone. That is what you're most comfortable with. Now what I'm saying is those that are naturals, the natural beings of the planet, those of you who know who you are, or maybe soon to come to know who you are. Now I used the reference earlier with the natural people that live in jungles and forests in a way that they live as an example because they don't have the depression. Their children aren't mentally disturbed. Their children are developing properly. They're not growing immaturely. They're not acting like overgrown babies. They can fend for themselves. They can do for themselves. They're being fed properly emotionally. They're being nourished properly physically. But yet the European will tell you that these people are malnourished, that these people are savages. But they don't have the problems that the so-called civilized has. So if this is civilization, I don't want it. I'd rather be a savage. Because the savages have more balance, more harmony, more tranquility. They're more in tune with nature, more aligned with nature and the planet. And they raise their children up as such. They teach their children and they educate their children about things of true value. The earth, the environment, and how to live. About nature. Not about unnatural things and unnatural forms of what we think is education. We're telling our children to grow up, to get a job, to pay to go to school, to get a job, to pay for going to school. Where's the logic in that? They don't have those worries in the jungle or in the forest. They live natural. They don't worry about utilities or bills. They don't worry about health care because the earth is their health care. They receive their health from nature, their nourishment from nature. So they don't have the ailments that the synthetics and the unnaturals have because they're in tune with nature and the natural way of life. And this is where we need to go back. We need to go back to nature because this unnatural life is killing us. This unnatural life is toxic. It's poison. Every aspect of it is poisoning us. Spiritually, mentally, physically. Universally. It's universal poison. But it seems that we're addicted. We're emotionally attached to. We've developed a chemical dependency on these dead cultures and this death style that we've become so accustomed to living, that we've become so attracted to. But all false things perish. These things are false and they will perish. And if you remain untrue and remain false, you will perish along with them. Keep it true. Now, I know for some of you, you may feel that a natural way of life or going back to nature is too much. You don't want to live like that. Don't want to live, you know, in huts and grass houses and things like that, because this is what you've seen on television. This is what the European has programmed you to think that living a natural life is like. But in actuality, you can create your own natural life, how you perceive it to be, how you want it to be. You can build any type of home you choose to, any type of sheltering you choose to, whatever type of clothing you choose to wear or to not wear. If you want to wear shoes or you don't want to wear shoes. If you want to be barefoot and you want to receive the electricity from the earth, then do so. If you want to wear shoes and you want to block the electricity from the earth from time to time, that's your choice as well. But still getting away from these unnatural cities and states and these unnatural societies. We have to escape from them. You know, we have to let go, because ultimately they're just bringing about our demise. You know, we have to start thinking self-preservation. We have to start thinking about being self-sustaining. self-sufficient, independent. We have to know how to live in nature. You know, because nature puts everything there that you need. All the tools are there in nature. We just have to learn or relearn how to use these tools. This is why we must remember ourselves and become whole again. This is the importance of Sankofa. Going back to the beginning, to pick up the pieces, to move forward after collecting these pieces and becoming whole, or collecting these pieces to become whole so we can move forward. So this is, you know, what we have to start going with this. We have to really start thinking outside of the box, outside of the European box that most of us are thinking inside of, and that we dread to think without. That box has to be eliminated. And we have to start thinking like Africans. Our highest self, the house of the divine spirit. Not like Europe, bondage, bound to the flesh, bound to the body, the lower self, the self without light, without sun, the sunless self. We have to become illuminated. We have to illuminate ourselves. We have to stay illuminated. We have to become the candle that fuels our own fire, as Bruce Lee would say. So, in closing, I say, who are really the civilized and who are really the uncivilized? Who are really the savage? The European's culture is savage. It's full of poison, disease, and death. It consists of destroying the planet, the water, the air, the earth, and everything needed to sustain life. Even trying to block out the sun. All of these things are unnatural. They all lead to death or destruction. So with that being said, family, wholeness to you. Rise and be greater.